one with God the Lord Most High. Your hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you, our Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. You sing. You didn't want heaven without us. So Jesus, you brought heaven down. My sin was great, your love was greater. What could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. How sweet is your name, how good you are. We love to sing your name, Lord. Love to sing of who you are. Death could not hold you. The veil tore before you. You silenced the boast of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, the praise of your glory. For you are raised to life again. You have no rival, you have no equal, now and forever.
Firstly, welcome to everybody, both here and at home, who's tuning into this second Living Faith session. In short, it's about people sharing their stories, people from inside and outside of the church, on how our Lord has touched their lives in some way, or somebody that they know. Now, as I was just preparing for today, I woke up one night in the week recently, which I don't usually do because I sleep very well. And this isn't going to sound glamorous, but I went to the bathroom and basically I started praying for inspiration in terms of what visual props I could use today. And when I woke up in the morning, literally that split second, it was a very clear voice saying to me two things. Firstly, you've got that mirror, that long mirror in your daughter's old bedroom. Bring that along, because that we can gently encourage folk to reflect on themselves, reflect on their lives. And I'm just listening at this point. And then there was a little bit more. It was actually that cross that you had donated from the first session, from somebody who came to the first Living Faith session. Hang that over the mirror, because when people look in the mirror, I want you to tell them that some people may not like what they see. And I want you to remind them that I made everybody in my image. And when I look back at that first session, a number of things have happened. It's not just the fact that 200 odd people have looked at this video online and or been here, but actually 7 people, 2 of whom are here today, have come forward and want to share their stories. And 2 of those people are from outside of these 4 walls. Equally, people have inquired about the evocative painting that we shared and the evocative music that we've played, which is actually going to be our signature tune, if you like, which we played this morning before we started. But more than that, people have actually started different conversations and making different connections. And one of those connections I want to introduce to you this morning is a parishioner, David Day. David has kindly come forward and wants to share his story, his reflection. This is a very powerful story, and I won't say any more, and I'll ask David to come and actually share it with you himself. Thank you.
Well, good morning. My name is David Day. I've been a regular member of this church for 20 years. In fact, my wife and I were married here nearly 18 years ago. My story this morning is about my wife's father, my father-in-law, and his name is Randall. When my wife was a little girl and growing up in Ely, Cardiff, her father, Randall, spent most of his time in and out of prison. Randall was a burglar, a thief, an alcoholic, and a heavy gambler. He was a hard man, a so-called enforcer on the council estate where he lived. Just over 30 years ago, Randall got divorced, and he remarried, and he moved to Newport in order to get away from his old lifestyle. Randall and his wife lived in a small one-bedroom basement flat that they rented from a local housing association. About 8 or 9 years ago, a new tenant moved into the flat directly above Randall and his wife. Now, this tenant had mental health problems, and at 2 a.m. every morning, without fail, the tenant would lift the bottom of his bed and drop it. And he would continue to do this for up to 2 hours every morning. The noise would wake Randall and his wife, and Randall would jump out of bed, rush up the stairs, and he would kick and bang on the tenant's front door and scream and shout for him to stop. On a number of occasions, Randall would kick the tenant's front door open and physically confront the man. And on a few occasions, the police were called. Randall complained to the Housing Association on numerous occasions, but nothing changed, nothing stopped. And the tenant continued to lift and drop his bed at 2 a.m. every morning. After 6 months, Randall was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, He couldn't sleep. He was exhausted. He wasn't eating properly. He was moody and irritable. And Randall became a bit of a recluse, and he barely left his flat. And he would spend all day sitting on his sofa, watching the television, and constantly thinking about the man upstairs. In Randall's state of mind, he believed that the only way he could stop the tenant from lifting and dropping his bed every morning was to kill the man. Randall decided he was going to murder the man upstairs and take the consequences. He knew that he would spend the rest of his life in prison, and he knew that he would die in prison. But in Randall's condition of mental health, he believed that he had no other option. So one day, Randall left his flat, and he bought a gun and ammunition from an old associate of his in Cardiff, and he decided that he would shoot the tenant upstairs when his wife went away for a weekend with her friends. During the next few weeks, Randall went through how he would execute his plan. He decided that he would simply walk up the stairs, kick the tenant's front door open, rush into his bedroom, point the gun, and shoot the man dead. Then he would walk down the stairs and into his living room, place the gun on his coffee table, and call the police. He would sit down, light a cigarette, and wait for the police to arrive. So when the time came and his wife went away for a weekend, Randall wrote 2 letters, one to my wife and one to his wife. And in the letters, Randall explained why he had killed the man, and he asked my wife and his wife to forgive him. Before Randall went to bed that evening, he placed the 2 letters on the worktop in his kitchen. And when Randall got into bed that evening, he fell asleep straight away, which was strange because usually Randall was so hectic with anger and frustration and anticipation of the thumping noise to come above his bedroom ceiling that he could never fall asleep. But on this particular night, he did. And at 2 a.m., the tenant began to lift and drop his bed, and the noise woke Randall. Randall got out of bed, but before he reached for his gun, he got down on his knees and he prayed to Jesus. Now, Randall said that he cannot remember a time in his life that he ever got down on his knees and prayed to Jesus. And Randall explained why he was going to kill the man upstairs. And he explained his frustration, his anger, exhaustion, his feelings of isolation and despair, and his feelings of being worthless. And Randall asked Jesus to forgive him. Then, Randall said something incredible happened, something truly amazing. He said a wonderful feeling came over him, and it was a feeling that he had never, ever experienced before. Randall said it was a feeling far better than all the drugs and alcohol that he'd ever consumed in his life. He said the feeling was one of pure love, of pure happiness, joy and understanding, forgiveness, hope and peace. And this feeling came over Randall in powerful waves that kept crashing through his whole body. Randall cried, but he cried with happiness, and tears were flowing down his face. And Randall knew that at that moment, Jesus had touched him. And he believed that Jesus was kneeling down next to him and praying with him. Randall thanked Jesus, and he asked Jesus to help the man upstairs and to give the help that the man needed. Randall got back into bed and he fell asleep. The next morning when Randall got out of bed, he got down on his knees and he prayed to Jesus and thanked him once again. Randall went into his kitchen and he tore up the 2 letters that he'd written for my wife and his wife. Then he got rid of the gun. I don't know where, I didn't ask him. Then Randall went into his living room and he found an old copy of Yellow Pages, and he flicked through the Yellow Pages and he selected a local church at random, and it just happened to be a Baptist church. Randall phoned the number and he spoke to the minister and told the minister this story. And within half an hour, the minister was sitting in Randall's room and having a cup of coffee with him. From that moment on, Randall would attend church most Sundays, and within a period of time, Randall was baptized into the church. Now, how do I know the story? Well, my wife and I were part of a packed congregation one evening where Randall was baptized, and Randall stood up in front of the whole congregation and he told his story of how he became a Christian. Now that in itself is incredible, because Randall was a quiet man and he'd shy away from crowds. And he would never, ever stand up in front of a large crowd and make a speech, especially one so personal. But I believe that Jesus gave Randall the courage that evening to tell his story of his journey to Christ. And I can tell you, it was one hell of a journey. Subsequently, Randall became a street pastor, helping the people who've had too much to drink in Newport City Centre on the weekends. Randall would go to AA meetings, where he would talk about the problems and consequences of heavy drinking and drug taking. Randall would help out every week with the church's soup kitchens, feeding and talking to the homeless and the forgotten. Sadly, Randall passed away just over a year ago, 10 months after my wife passed away. To me, this story is a powerful reminder that Jesus understands the pain and suffering, the hardships, despair and disappointments, the loneliness, and the feelings of being worthless and abandoned that some people experience every day, every week, every month, every year of their lives. And it also shows that no matter how bad we've been in our life, no matter what terrible things we've done in our life, or even what terrible things we have said in our life, if we ask Jesus, Jesus is always willing to forgive us and to help us and to show us the true way, no matter how young or indeed how old we are. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you, David. David, or really Randall's story, can speak to us on many levels. When I first heard this story from David, one point leapt out for me, which was this: it was about a message of hope in dire circumstances. And in a way, that's very timely, because at the moment we all know what's happening in Ukraine. And I'd ask everybody, both here and at home, just to have a minute's silence, just to pause in solidarity for the people in Ukraine and what they're going through at the moment, either in your thoughts or even in unspoken prayer. So if we could just take a minute's pause, please, with them in mind. Thank you. Now, I don't know about yourselves, but one of the defining images for me of what's happening in Ukraine at the moment is seeing people, ordinary people, actually leaving their homeland, their country of birth, and fleeing. And I guess we all relate to different things in terms of what's happening out there at the moment, but that to me is very much real and happening. And that brings me to our second story, a story that's been shared kindly by Ray Sherry, and there's a link to, in many ways, what's happening in Ukraine and what I've just touched on in terms of that image in my head. Because Ray's early life, if I recall, Ray's from Northern Ireland, and his family left Northern Ireland when he was 8 or 9, I think, Ray? Yeah? In 1973, at the time of the Troubles. So like the folk in Ukraine at the moment fleeing their country, Ray and his family fled Ireland. Now, the story that Ray has kindly recorded for us, which I'm going to play in a few moments, is another very powerful story. And on one hand, it's about a life-saving operation, but equally, it's, in my view, a life-changing operation. Now, I'm not going to say any more because Ray's words speak for themselves. So if you just bear with me while I fiddle with the technology. Actually, on the front of the booklet that I used to actually put my notes for these sessions, it actually says, be still and know that I'm God. And I need those moments when I'm doing things like this to get the technology going.
My name is Raymond Sherry. People call me Ray, or Raymondo. I'm 58 years old. In my early years, my family moved from Belfast to Cardiff in 1973, when I was only 9. I enjoyed football and athletics, and competed for Welsh athletics at under 20 level. I've always been self-motivated and very competitive. When I learned in 2005 that I had a rare liver condition called primary sclerosing cholangitis, PSC for short, the best advice given to me then was to stay fit, because one day it would be a major factor in whether I would have a liver transplant or not. I took up cycling in 2008, and 2 years later led a team of 10 people from Land's End to Joan O'Groats, raising £21,000 for Macmillan Cancer Support. When you do things at an extreme level and test your body to the full, you learn a lot about yourself and develop ways to cope with stress, extreme stress, day in, day out. In the years that followed, I cycled thousands of miles, sometimes for charity and other times just for myself. In 2015, I decided to take up triathlon, and I competed in several competitions thereafter, including the World Age Group Qualifier in Cardiff in 2018. I didn't qualify for the World Championships and decided instead to work towards Ironman Wales, to be held in September 2020. After 3 half marathons, several 100-mile cycling events, and swimming over 1 mile, my training was going well. Then COVID came, and everything changed. My 6 preparation events for Ironman were cancelled, and so eventually was the main event. All this time, I was living with the effects of PSC. In October 2020, I started to feel unwell, and my skin turned yellow with jaundice, and before long, the conversation with my consultant doctor switched from living with PSC to transplant assessment. My liver was failing. By the time January came, my jaundice was the worst I'd ever seen it, and my body was failing in several other ways. There was little anyone could do, little that I could do, but continue to pray and hope for the right outcome, a donor. I was still cycling, but running was proving very hard, and swimming out of the question due to COVID restrictions. Besides, I would have looked like one of those giant inflatable bananas you often see on holiday. But I kept going. Hope, I felt, was just around the corner. It was 7:30 a.m. I was almost awake when I heard my mobile phone ringing. I picked it up and recognized the number instantly. It was the liver transplant coordinator's number from the Royal Free Hospital, London. After the polite greetings, I heard the words, "We have a liver for you, and we've checked it out, and all is looking good." An ambulance would pick me up in an hour and drive me to London. Ward 9 North was my destination. The ambulance driver was from Cardiff. He was called Mike. We'd met only 2 weeks earlier on a false alarm trip, and I knew the journey would pass quickly as we talked and shared a common interest in running and were roughly the same age. It was a nice distraction as the ambulance rattled its way down the M4. Mike had delivered many transplant patients before, and I promised to message him when it was all over. Arriving at the Royal Free, Mike did his duty and accompanied me to the ward. His job was done. Mike was a good guy, a sort of angel in disguise. The COVID pandemic was at a new peak, and rigorous controls were in place before I could be shown to a bed. I was seated in a cold corner room and took a few moments for some peaceful and reflective thoughts. I wasn't thinking of much, other than whether I would get lunch or not. I did, and it helped my mood. No one should have a liver transplant without first having lunch. Besides, I knew from my early transplant education sessions that it would be many hours before the real action would begin. An hour passed. The COVID tests were negative, and I was shown to my bed, located in a side room of 4 beds. I was on my own. That sort of made sense, given I was about to undergo a life-saving operation, and the staff wanted to protect me from any unnecessary human contact. The hours drifted by, and my only recollection of that period was that I was busy doing something on the internet or chatting with family and friends on WhatsApp. A transplant coordinator would drop by every so often to keep me updated. After arriving at the hospital around 1:30 p.m, it was now 5 p.m, the usual time for dinner. Having been in many hospitals over the years, I got used to asking certain important questions like, what time's lunch? What time's dinner? It was quiet, and I called Mum to update her on progress. It was the first time I had truly thought about my donor. I had always known that for me to live through my rare liver disease, diagnosed 16 years earlier, someone would lose their life in order to save mine. Some family would lose a son or a daughter, a father or a mother. Someone out there would make the greatest sacrifice of all in giving their life so that someone else might live. What an incredible, selfless act. Someone I didn't know and would never meet was giving a critical part of themselves so that I could live. Time passed as I reflected on this, and eventually dinner arrived right on time. A transplant coordinator popped by to give me an update and to inform me that all the preparations were going well. I could also have a light dinner, but no pudding. I asked lots of questions about the preparations. I didn't feel any connection with my donor. For me at that time, it was just an important, if not critical, medical process I needed to go through, to get through. At 12:30 a.m. that following morning, the duty transplant coordinator returned with the news that it was time to go to theatre. I asked for a moment and said a quiet prayer. Eventually standing up, we started chatting again. It was such a casual conversation, and we walked side by side to floor 3, as if it was a walk in the park, chatting away like two friends. We stopped outside the theatre to talk to the anaesthetist. I could see over his shoulder into the big white operating room. I was unbelievably calm. No nerves, nothing. It was as if someone was looking out for me. After a few minutes outside the theatre, I was taken in. And so all the real action began. Everything went like clockwork from then on. And the main surgeon called Mum from the operating theatre once the transplant had been successfully completed. I spoke, so I'm told, but I have no recollection of that conversation. The operation took 10 hours, and I was eventually brought round fully 24 hours later. Besides the physical changes on my body, I couldn't stop thinking of my donor. A person I didn't know, hadn't met, hadn't really thought about until 3 days ago. I couldn't get them out of my head. I was quite happy talking about everything and anything, except when it came to my donor. I would very quickly be filled with the most overwhelming emotions, the sort of emotions a person feels when someone really close to you dies. To this day, my only explanation is that God was working in one of his mysterious ways, and that the Holy Spirit was watching over me as I walked to the operating theatre, as calm as a cucumber. I left hospital 7 days later, a record for a liver transplant patient of the Royal Free Hospital. I called Mike, the Cardiff ambulance driver, and gave him the good news. Every day, I think and pray for my donor and my donor's family. I wrote a letter to the family on the 6 months anniversary of my transplant and did a 5K park run, dedicating it to the memory of the person who gave me a second chance. I thank God, my family and friends for watching over me through my entire life, for guiding me in the 16 years since I was diagnosed with a rare liver condition, and for being there in my hours of greatest need. I thank the teams at the NHS for their commitment, their dedication and motivation in the most trying of circumstances, in giving me all the medical attention that I needed. I have a second chance, given to me by the most courageous and generous person I didn't know. And if that's not a miracle, I don't know what is.
Thank you for allowing us to hear that, Ray. You know, you mentioned about a second chance. And when I reflected on your story, when you first shared it with me, two things kind of leapt out for me. The first was more or less in your own words, where you went from a position of thinking about yourself to thinking and the operation, to then thinking about the donor, someone unseen, anonymous, and that person giving something to save your life. The second thing that occurred to me was that I thought of our Lord, and he donated more than just an organ. He donated his life for us, to save us, to reach out for us. How beautiful is that? So to conclude today, when you look in the mirror and you look at perhaps your relationship with our Lord, whatever state it's in, whether it's good, bad or ugly, whether you have no relationship whatsoever, then I hope that something that you've either heard from David's story or Ray's recollections, or that you've seen as a result of this, I hope that helps you in some way, either to kickstart your relationship or to rekindle it. So on that note, I would like to say, God bless you and keep you. Take care. I look forward to seeing you the same time, same place, at the last Sunday in March, along with people that will share their stories, and also, in this instance, Phil Collins and Genesis. Thank you.